Hey there, everyone. Looks like I had set this to 8:30 and then put it on my schedule for 9. So I showed up at 9. I'm sorry if anyone showed up at 8:30. I was a little bit late there. Anyways, thanks so much for everyone for joining this live. So basically, what this is mostly to one, check in, see how people are doing with the 100 days of data engineering with the checklist. I want to see, how are people feeling with it. Maybe talk through some questions if people have got any new questions as you've been doing the 100 days of data engineering checklist. So if you have questions, I'd love to kind of hear them. But yeah, really, it's just meant for you guys to, if you have questions, even if it's just about like getting hired or other things in the data engineering world, just for you to have them. For those of you who maybe don't know what we are talking about, let me share my screen. And someone just asked about who made the checklist. I put together this checklist. So yeah, this is basically what we're talking about when I say 100 days of data engineering. I put together this checklist. If it takes you 100 days, if it takes you 200 days, I think that's less the point. It's obviously, it sounds good. So, it's a nice round number that you can, I think, hopefully achieve. And, where you end up at the end of the 100 days is probably okay. And I do put in, I think, a few days in there to try to give you guys some chance to catch up. So that's really the goal here. So if you go through it, in theory, if you followed it since day one, which I'm sure not all of you have, and again, you don't have to be following it along with everyone. We are obviously on today, which is the 7th, which is about somewhere here, wherever the live is. Where's the live? Oh, we're here. We're right there. So we're right here, about day 36. Give or take a few days. And so at this point, what you really should have covered at the beginning is obviously you should have covered kind of an intro. So the first 10 days, if you went through this or watched the video, is really meant to give you guys a re-intro into some basic things so you can kind of tell where you're at, right? Be able to work with SQL, do some joins, run some case statements, some very baseline SQL kind of things. Same thing with Python, right? We're reviewing loops and functions. And really the goal is just to get you comfortable. And if you have no experience with any data engineering techniques or programming or things like that, then at least you'll know where you're at. Someone just asked about, will you have capabilities in AWS, Azure, and GCP at the end of the 100 days? Probably you'll at least be familiar with them, right? I think I said this when I made the 100 days video, that this is really meant to be more of a guide to get you like a good understanding of what the world looks like. More than likely, you'll have to like pick one, right? Like you'll pick AWS, Azure, or GCP at the end of it and be like, this is what I like working with. And you kind of have to figure out which companies you want to work for. So a lot of people always ask, like, which cloud should I work or learn? AWS tends to have the biggest market share. It also, I don't know, I always tend to lean towards like, that's what I like learning more. Azure tends to be pretty well positioned in enterprise, and there's a ton of migrations to Azure right now. So there's a lot of work in that space as well. GCP is kind of the fallen behind, forgotten child. It's still used, but I think it's got like 11 or 12% of the market share compared to like Azure's 22 and AWS is like 30 some. So those are all good options, but obviously AWS has the biggest market share, so you can take that as you'd like. The one saving grace I always say with GCP is they have BigQuery, and BigQuery really is the thing that like has kept it going. But yeah, just kind of going through this. I think I referenced Linux, and I really wanted you guys to like take some chances here with your SQL skills. So as you're learning SQL, there are tons of free data sets. So I pointed out the BigQuery public data stack or public data Stack Overflow data set, and you can start asking your own questions here. Like I gave a few here, but you can set up your own questions and answer them on these data sets, because I think that also gets you very familiar with how your data actually is. Like what does your data look like? What kind of questions would you be asked by a manager to answer based on these data sets? So I gave you 4 examples here, but you can definitely write out your own questions and try to answer them, because I think that makes it challenging, right? Like you have to look at your data and actually say, what can I answer from this data? So yeah. And then someone asked about AWS. I mean, if you could learn AWS in, what is this, like 5 days, there would be a lot less, you'd be paid a lot less for that work. And again, this is one of the places where I'm like, I can see people falling behind. It's 10 hours. So you can break it up into 2-hour videos, but it is a long video. So I can definitely see this being a place where people like have to slow down, and maybe you take an extra day or 2 or 3, or maybe make it an hour a day. So it takes 10 days instead of the 5 days listed here. Again, don't let that dishearten you. It's a lot of content. There's a lot of stuff to keep up with. Let's see. Someone asked for Python, is basically OOP, object-oriented programming, necessary? I'd say yes and no, and I say that because you may or may not have to write it, but you will likely have to look at it. Like I've definitely had to look at plenty of OOP in my life, so it's worth knowing. It's worth understanding how it operates and be like, okay, this is a class. This is a someone's using something like inheritance here, just because you will have to read code, and I think that's always helpful to understand what you're reading. Okay, so someone said, I read the first chapter of Kimball. I have a feeling that most of the information is irrelevant to today's standards. Can you please give me my thoughts? Can you please give me thoughts? The way I look at Kimball is that it is worth understanding, right? Like one, there are valid data models in there. If you could keep going deeper, I think there are generally valid data models that are worth knowing. People will use things like the term fact and additive fact and non-additive fact and dimensions and all of these terms that you will see here and there. So in those ways, yeah, like there's still this space that Kimball has a lot of weight still. Now, are there obviously other ways people are doing data modeling? Are people using things like one big table to like just join all this stuff together rather than having things broken out? Sure, in some cases. But for every case that there's plenty of teams still using your traditional data warehousing, right? Like I think the thing is that there's a lot of companies in different stages. And so that's sometimes what gets hard, is that sometimes the companies you read the most about are the companies that are doing things the most, or like the most uniquely, right? Because they're actually people find that unique or novel. And then you're like, oh, do I have to be doing techniques in this way or that way? And it's like, well, maybe. Like at Facebook, we still use the term dimensions and facts, but the way we use those dimensions and facts were very different, I'd say, than your standard one. But there's not a book that's out there that's going to teach you that, right? Generally, we like snapshot it every day, right? We just took a snapshot of every day. And so, when the analyst was looking at whatever data set they were looking at, like employees or, users, they would just look at a snapshot of today's users, which then sometimes limited them on historical analysis. And there are ways you could kind of do that, but then you have to like either sometimes create a separate table to do the historical analysis for them anyways, like add in a slowly changing dimension, or do something with, some sort of array field. So there were a lot of ways where you always ended up back at the same place, where it's like, okay, now we still need to do this, slowly changing dimension or adding in this other layer of traditional data warehousing. So I do think it's worth it. Let's see. My profile is completely different. Even if I want to learn data engineering, can I start here? I think you can totally start here, right? This is meant to be, again, that's why the first 10 days are meant to be kind of an intro just to the basic skills, right? Programming, SQL, some data warehouse or data modeling, and some Linux. That way, if for some reason you're like, you know what, I'm still behind, I've done these first 10 days, I don't know what's going on. That's fine, right? Like take some extra time. Like don't feel like you have to rush through this. I think that's important here. Awesome. So someone says, I've worked through this. I've learned so much. That's awesome. Feel free to always share that online if you feel like there's certain things. I'd always love to see that. Are there places that don't use OOP? I mean, I assume you mean like companies or something, or maybe use cases. I mean, there's people use like functional programming or other options such as that. But and there's also just scripting where people will just script. I think there's a lot of scripting that goes along, right? Like if you're using Airflow, some people will go to the trouble of like creating crazy objects behind the scenes in Airflow and create like utilities and things like that. Other people will just use it for scripting and then like, put some Python scripts in and things of that nature. Or they'll use a bunch of Lambdas, which is actually the next video I'm working on, which is like putting together like some basics on Lambdas. So yeah, like there are places it exists. There's places it doesn't exist, but you're going to find it everywhere. Where are the ducks? I mean, yeah, I guess we didn't put in any DuckDB here. I just want to keep it pretty straightforward. But in theory, I guess there's this whole project section, right? Like this last 70 days. So if you want to, video, if you want to take over this section and give an example of like based off Ben's 100 days of engineering, here's a project you can build with DuckDB. That is an option. Obviously, there's this whole third of it that's open real estate, essentially, because I left it pretty open because I wanted people to figure out their own projects. So that's where ducks can go. Let's see. Let's see. Hey, love your channel. Thanks for all the hard work, or all your work, not hard work. I put that in there myself. I'm currently a data analyst studying for DE. Is analytics engineer still a viable advancement for my career? Yeah, I mean, there's still plenty of roles that have this analytics engineer title. In fact, I think I was looking at Netflix and they have a few positions that might be remote even that are in this analytics engineer role. And they pay obviously very well because it's Netflix. But obviously, there's only probably a dozen of them, and anytime there's one, there's going to be 500 people applying. So the challenge generally is getting into it. If you can, obviously, I'd always say try to move laterally into your company, into a data engineering role or analytics engineer role at your company versus trying to get a new role as that. But there's still plenty of roles in DE and analytics engineer for now are still viable. For a person that just got started data engineering, what skills should I focus on? Kind of what this 100 days covers, right? Python, SQL, or Python programming, really. But Python's just very heavy in most companies. SQL, data modeling, data pipelines. That's really the baseline, right? Like there's more after that, right? You're going to have to pick up cloud. You're going to have to pick up streaming. You're going to have to pick up all these things. But if you can get those basics down, you do most of the work, right? You don't have to get like you don't have to constantly be fighting. I'm actually going to do a whole like little mini series here on like cloud tools that you can use as a data engineer. So I'm starting with Lambdas. I think I'm going to go into S3 and like Athena and a few other things. But yeah, you don't need to feel like you have to catch up with all of that stuff. You'll learn it on the job. Honestly, when I started and I got out of college, the only thing I had was like programming and a little bit of database knowledge, and then eventually had to read and do things like this 100-day checklist to really get up to it. Thanks for putting 100 days list all together. I find those resources very valuable so far. The only things that I would like to see, but is not here, is DBT. Yeah, I didn't put DBT on here. Did I put? I'm curious. I'm curious if I put. I did put Docker. So I mean Docker. Yeah, I put Docker and SQL. I mean, DBT's got a little more than that, but you add in some Docker if you want to like spin it up yourself. You add in some SQL. You add in some Jinja too. You got DBT, sort of. I mean, there's a ton of like nuances there, right? Like you have the ability to create like macros and things like that with DBT. But again, then you can do a whole DBT deep dive. But in order to start with DBT, you can probably, as long as you got those baseline skills, you can jump into most companies and work with those solutions, right? And work with DBT. So that's why I didn't put DBT in here. There's too many tools, Any chance to recommend any valuable resources on that? I feel like maybe Michael Kahn stuff might be good. I don't know if you know Michael Kahn, or I think it's Michael Kahn is actually saying he's got a data engineering channel too. He's got a couple DBT videos. I know that because I remember there was a time that I needed to create a macro for something, and he had a video exactly creating that macro. And so I like looked it up. I was like, oh, this is the exact macro I need. Yeah, you can look up his stuff. It's pretty solid. Instead of cloud, can we use on-premise or use premises? Of course, you can use premises. I mean, the cloud just tends to be everywhere, so it's worth knowing, right? If you can't access it or something, obviously, work with what you got. The cloud is definitely something that's heavily relied on. The DE camp is teaching Mage for orchestration. What are your thoughts on Mage versus Airflow? I obviously have a little bias in terms of, well, I have bias honestly in both ways. I have Airflow has got a long, like, will always have a special place for me because I came up at a time when before, I mean, I guess a lot of people came up and you kind of naturally go through this, right? Like you go through these phases where you need to automate work. And so the first things that you usually do is like, okay, set up some cron jobs. Then I try to set them up in certain order so that they run, and that the other job doesn't run before this job. And I remember like even in the database, I'd have to like set up like a table that would manage whether or not a certain job had like started or stopped, and if there was something that depended on it. So I literally had to build this whole dependency chain in certain instances. And so then I came up with Airflow, or saw, not came up with it, but like ran into it around 2015, 2016. And yeah, I mean, it was like groundbreaking, right? Like, it's like, oh, I don't have to do all of this other stuff. And so Airflow always has a good place in my heart. Mage, of course, when I'm an advisor, so that means there's some financial motivation there. But overall, I think those solutions, whether it's Mage or even some of the other ones like Prefect, are going in the right direction, right? Like they're trying to make things better. Airflow is also like Airflow is constantly trying to improve. I think I saw recently that they added data sets into like 2.4, which is supposed to be you being able to track data sets throughout the DAG. I haven't had to use them yet, but there's going to be a constant push and pull. I think Mage is worth learning because I do think people are starting to pick it up. But obviously, I have bias in all directions, so that's just where I'm at. Also, the Mage videos have been great. I've been watching the ones on Zoom Camp. Matt's been doing an amazing job. Like, honestly, like great content, great examples. I do think something like Mage will be probably that next phase, where you can like have almost any tool at your disposal, right? Like if you want to put in Airbyte, if you want to put in DBT, it's just in one place rather than, Airflow is kind of limited. But it's also well supported. This is the problem. I'm too much of an engineer sometimes where I can't take a stance. So in terms of extensive project, I am getting data from source and orchestrating it on Glue weekly, also using Delta tables and loading data into Redshift. Do I need to cater to data quality issues? Probably, right? Like somewhere in there, you probably want to do some data quality checks. I don't know if Glue lets you do data quality checks, so you might have to do some sort of script on like a Lambda or something at the very least. It's getting very complicated, that's for sure. You got Glue, Delta tables, Redshift. Yeah, somewhere probably be good. Yeah, so someone's like, obviously there's a lot of beginner content. What about more in-depth content? Yeah, so I think, obvious reasons that one reason YouTubers create a ton of intro content is it does well, right? Like at the end of the day, there's always more people at the intro space. I think whenever I create things that are a little more like even just a step above intro, like there's just sometimes it doesn't even get pushed to people, right? Like I'll get people who will complain about the fact that all my content's intro, and then I'll be like, what about all this other content? I don't even know if you've watched it or seen it, because YouTube won't push it if it doesn't start clicking with the algorithm. I'm starting to at least do some deeper dives into more specific projects that you do. So like I'm doing like migrations. I've got some videos that I'm putting on that. I've got a few other videos that I like to do, like picking the right tool. Because I think after a certain point, obviously there's only so much technical knowledge that you're going to hit a cap where it's like, okay, it's less about technical. It's more about like, how do you run a successful data migration? Because all that is like thousands of really basic tasks, right? Like taking code from, one from one, whatever, Python 2 to Python 3, or taking, SQL from SQL Server to Oracle, or Oracle to SQL Server, right? And just running that really well and succeeding. And that is a hard task, right? Like, although it's like 1,000 easy technical tasks, it's a one big hard, task that they get to do. So that's what I'm putting together right now, is a few videos on that, like examples of the actual projects that I've run in the past, and the problems you run into when you try to migrate, and how you should migrate, and things like that. So cool. I mean, I don't know if I've got any specific hints for PySpark, right? Like everything is, right? Like PySpark is, there's no fast answer to anything. It's like, how do you pick up any solution quickly? Well, I at least how I learn anything, I'm trying to say, I'm generalizing this. If I'm learning a topic, first I'll like go watch a ton of videos on it, right? Like just try to get a very vast understanding of what something is, right? So I get like 3 or 4 perspectives. Like right now I'm trying to pick up Mandarin for various reasons. So I'm like watching tons of videos. But that's not necessarily useful. It's just good to like get an understanding of what's there, right? It's like, okay, this is what's there. Then you got to figure out more concrete ways to actually apply it, right? I bought a book. Now figure out where you can go apply it in real life. Like you have to like actually start using it and actually start digging into it more specifically and being very intentional. At least that's my method. I don't know if there's a fast method to do too much. That's awesome. Someone's taking this along with that. Yeah, someone said, how do you get basically experience, right? Like how do you do the classic, beginner level role needs 10 years of experience. Obviously that's not a beginner level role, although companies think that. What I'd say for most people is like, try to get an analyst role. Don't get too stuck on the data engineering role. Get an analyst role. Those are generally easier. And then try to break in laterally. I've seen it too many times work that like, I'm like, look, this works. I've done it. I helped people at Facebook do it who came in from like recruiting and like worked from recruiting to analyst, from analyst to data engineer. Like I've seen it happen time and time again. So I think it's totally possible. And that's generally what I'd recommend. No, you don't need to get the certification. Someone's asking, do you need the cert before you get a data engineering role? No. I mean, you don't have to. So someone's asking, I'm getting ready for AWS Cloud Practitioner exam. What should be my next step afterwards? If all those skills are solid, one, start trying to get jobs. Obviously, if you're not, I don't know where you are in the job world, but start trying to get jobs. And 2, build projects. Yeah, like have fun with it. Try challenging yourself with it. Share what you're doing with other people. If you do something cool, like see if you can go talk at like a PyData or something, because even if you don't have a job, you can always do that talk. Like start thinking about what the next step is, because it's not just like eventually that learning has to do something. Otherwise, it just becomes knowledge that you lose. I want to say, so someone's asking earlier, I referenced the video about DBT. I want to say it's Michael Kahn. Let's see. Let me see if I will look him up. Let's see if I can find him. Michael Kahn data. Oh, nope, that's not him. Kahn Analytics. Nope. If that doesn't work, I will, you know what? I think it's data modeling. I look up data modeling. I think I might find him. I'm Kahan. I'm cutting out some of his name. That's why. All right. So yeah, let me just stop sharing. I'm going to share another screen to answer this one. Share screen. No, not this screen. Present. Oh, I guess share screen. So someone earlier was asking about DBT. Khan Data Solutions has a few. I wonder if you put them into playlists, because that'd be nice. Yeah, it looks like he's got a
hello and welcome
DBT back section here. You can kind of watch. He's got, oh yeah, look at this. He's got like, dang, he's got so many videos here. So yeah, he's got a lot of intros here on DBT. I mean, like this is going to keep you pretty busy. Not that long, it looks like. It really is meant to be kind of like answering those questions you'll have when you set up DBT. So yeah, great, solid person, solid content over here. So yeah, Kahan Data Solutions. If you're looking for it. All right. And then I'll reshare back at the here, share. Here. Cool. Yeah, I mean, this is just re-jumping on Mage. Yeah, I mean, Matt's doing great. Like I'm very excited. Like I've like watched at least, I don't know, 3 or 4 of the videos. They just keep popping up. I'm like, oh, and it's always funny. Some are from Zoom Camp, some are from Mage, so they did that well. Are there any specialties with DE field that would be worth looking into? For example, in DS, you could be really good at supervised models or regression models. Yeah, I'd say in the DE field, right? Like you can like become a really, really good data modeler. That's one thing, right? Like some people like the whole data architect kind of approach. You can become really good at like real time. You can be really good at like open source. I think that's another thing. I think the big main split generally is between the very techie data engineers, like that's very software heavy data engineers, and the more business focused, often what people call these days analytics engineer. I used to explain that before I heard what an analytics engineer was, but that's kind of the split that generally happens. Is you'll find these people that are like very business centric, maybe more focused on building like this logic layer that people can use, often in SQL. Tends to be more of your analytics engineer, and on the flip side, you have these like very technical people who are good at like streaming or real time or things that are very low level code, and are trying to improve performance. And those people tend to be more likely that techie data engineer. But even in there are little splits. And then you can become like a specialist in like, I do healthcare analytics really well, right? Like I know how to data model healthcare, things of that nature. So I think that's kind of the good split. What about Data Talks the Zoom Camp versus 100 days of data engineering challenges for a completely beginner in both Python and SQL? I mean, I think the great thing about Data Talks, right, is you've got someone there with you, right? Like where I kind of just put this together, rather than like they do this great job of organizing, a good group of people to give you kind of a talk. I just put this together. I went out and found it, and you have to do it yourself, right? Like you're not doing it live. You're going to be doing it yourself. So there's benefits there, right? Like there's benefits of you being on a course with other people and like being able to talk to people and like have them encourage you to go forward. That's why I put together the Discord channel. It's supposed to kind of act as that, but I will say that, I mean, like obviously if you've got something in real time, that's great. This is for people who probably like either want to do things on their own time, kind of just want to follow something, don't want to feel maybe restricted by someone else's coursework. You can replace things out, right? If you're like, hey, day 34, I want to learn something else, you can do that. So I think that's kind of the difference. There's a little more flexibility here. That one, obviously, though, has like a lot more live, a lot more like in-person kind of things going on. Yep. So someone just asked, I hardly see junior or associate DE roles. Is data analyst the way? Generally, yes. Like I've seen it at this point happen, I don't know, a dozen times, where people go from data analyst to data engineer. And when I say see, I mean people that I know. And I'm sure people have told me that more in comments as well, like where they're like, yeah, this is what I did. It's a very common approach. Let's see. What skills do we need for data analytics? I mean, I don't know if you mean data analytics in general or for data engineering. I'd say, these 100 days of data engineering cover a lot of them. So I don't know if there's more, but that's definitely part of it. Let's see. I have an informational interview this afternoon with Director of Analytics. That's awesome. After I saw a DE role in his organization, any good questions I should ask? I wish I knew what company they were at. Let's see. What would be a good question? I'm trying to think of like not a generic question, because there's the generic ones like I like some of the generic ones, like what's been the most challenging project your team's taken on, or maybe like what's something you like, have you done anything that you want to show off recently? I think those are always interesting, just to see if people like genuinely have anything that they're proud about. Like I want to know, like, hey, do you have anything that you're like proud about, or are you just doing work? Which is fine to just do work, but is there anything that you feel like is really kind of cutting edge, or at least challenging. Like, it doesn't have to be cutting edge, but like mentally, is this challenging, or am I going to be taking on projects that are kind of just a bunch of the same old, same old. So I think that's always kind of interesting from my perspective. Trying to think about other questions I might ask. Yeah, I'd probably like try to get some specifics about the company and be like, I don't know, ask something about if there are certain metrics that I knew about that industry, like healthcare. I'd be like, oh, like, how do you guys have like certain metrics that you care about, or something like that as well. Oh, I knew that they use Azure and Matillion. That's interesting. I guess with Matillion, I'd be curious, like, I mean, from your technical growth standpoint, like how much, like, is there a lot of technical work still there, right? Like, are you still writing a lot of code, or is this a lot of like, is it a lot of low code? What are they finding the most useful? Yeah, I think those would be some interesting questions. What's a good way to show your SQL skills? Should you upload your code with comments to GitHub, or write about your database and what you want to achieve with queries? I think a great way to do that, if you ever want to show off your skills, let's see if I can figure it out, find it. Got to remember his name suddenly. No, I'm forgetting it. Snowflake. Let's see if I can find this person, because I'm suddenly spacing on the name. Let's see if I can find it. Nope. Felipe. That's right. Felipe Hoffa. Let's see if I can find an example of where he does some stuff. See if he has anything. I hate that Medium removed the like likes from their articles. Now you can't tell if it's popular or not. I get that that's part of the point, but I mean, there is something to the fact that if an article looks like has a lot of likes, there's something there. Let's see, is this SQL or is this Python? No, this is kind of both, but I'll still show it. It'll take too long to find the exact thing. So stop screen, present, share screen. I'm sure there's an easier way to flip through this. But you can look up. So Felipe Hoffa has a ton of stuff where he kind of just shows off some of the work that he does. He works for Snowflake, so obviously currently shows off a lot about Snowflake. But yeah, he does a lot about like showing up blogs. I think blogs are always good. Have like a visual, right? Like do some sort of visualization. Let's see the most popular languages on Reddit after analyzing a million comments. Let's see, did he do some SQL somewhere, or is this just no SQL? Come on, give me some SQL. But yeah, one of the things is, I will say that doing some level of visualization is important, right? Like that keeps things attractive, right? Not just here's something, at least a little bit of SQL. Yeah, because that shows the results. Obviously, you're showing off your SQL skills, but you want to also show off that you can do something with those SQL skills. And I think that's what's important here, is like you don't just want to show off SQL skills. You got to do more than that. So that's kind of the thought there. Oh, I lost a bunch of questions. Let's see. At work, there is a lot of ETL work. How can I leverage this to my advantage when hunting for your DE role? Well, I mean, ETL work is a lot of what DEs do. So, I don't know if you're using certain tools, but definitely can talk about those tools. Definitely can talk about what those, if you've done like performance optimizations, maybe some level of like data modeling in there as well. But ETLs are pretty heavy in a lot of data engineering work. So, yeah. I want to be a data engineer. Is it hard? I mean, yes and no. I mean, it's time consuming. Like anything worth doing, it's not easy. It's going to take you time. But once you get there, I think that's the thing. It's like once you get there, every once in a while, you'll need to use like the knowledge that you've accumulated. But 90% of the time, like most other jobs, you're going to have to use a smaller portion of that knowledge just to do the grunt work and the work that needs to get done. And so, yeah, you need all the hard knowledge, but you don't get to use it as much as I think you'd like sometimes, which again is common. You kind of just have to do a lot of that that grunt work to get to the fun work. Would you recommend being a DE before trying to land an ML engineering role? I mean, maybe. I think with MLE, depends on the role. In some cases, you want to be more of a software engineer. Like Facebook, they preferred software engineering archetypes. But yeah, it'll depend on the role. Some places, yeah, like data engineering is perfect because their ML engineers just use Airflow to implement their models anyways. So it just depends. Yeah. Like I said earlier, that like if you do ETL work, yeah, you can definitely talk about that as like, building data building data pipelines, maybe try to do some data modeling. But yeah, I think we already kind of went over that. Okay, there's someone who asked, maybe you didn't mean to ask the same question 3 times, but you did. What other skills are necessary for senior DE apart from SQL and Python? Data architecture, data modeling. Data architecture, when I say that, I mean like all the stuff that goes into your data infrastructure. Okay, I've got Kafka, I've got whatever. Data modeling, obviously. Generally, maybe you're having to deal with some bigger design decisions, so you're actually the one designing the systems. And so I think those are kind of the big things. There's a lot about design, a lot about like make sure you're building the right things. And then then from there, it's a bunch of soft skills, like making sure you take initiative, having ownership, making sure you actually communicate what you're delivering and how you're delivering it, why you're delivering it the way you're delivering it, what are the trade-offs and why you pick this path. Having the ability to actually pick a path and not just give a bunch of, when someone asked me earlier about Mage versus Airflow, I was kind of like, here are the, both sides. I fall back to that naturally, but you kind of have to eventually start like making choices, right? Like, although it's a joke that senior engineers like the "it depends" line, I think eventually you have to start being like, yes, it depends, but this is what I think is best. And this is why. And those are the things that I think are the skills you have to pick up, and being able to do that again while communicating it and getting buy-in from management. So, yeah. How much data engineering do you have to learn to prepare for an internship? That's an interesting question. Like you need to be able to pass an interview, which generally means you need to be able to write SQL, be able to write code, be able to talk a little bit about data pipelines and data modeling. No one's going to expect you to be perfect. Like at Facebook, we didn't expect you to be perfect, but we do expect you to understand what, like if we say data modeling, you understand that concept. You don't just look at me blank. You don't have to know how to do it perfectly, but you need to be able to say, hey, what's a dimension table? What's a fact table? These are pretty basic concepts you can pick up. How important, relevant is doing certifications? They can become relevant after you get a job. I feel like if you're trying to use them to prove you can get a job, I don't know. There are other things you could do that I think would be better with your time. I think that's usually the way I look at it. Is like there might be better things like building a project that you can show off using the cloud, or networking or things of that nature to show off your basic skills versus trying to show off, I have cloud skills. Once you get a job, sometimes it's beneficial because like if you work for a consulting company, the more certificates that they have, the better. They love, like whenever I see other people's docs or like proposals, they love showing off all their certificates to be like, we are competent in these things. But to me, it almost says sometimes like, are you though? Like you spend so much time doing that. Were you actually doing it, or are you just, learning how to do it? Which to me are different things. How to prepare for DE role if you're planning to switch jobs from cloud to DE role in the next 6 months. Probably this 100 days of data engineering would be helpful, right? Because you've already got the cloud. So you need to add in some SQL, some Python, data warehousing, data modeling. I should put that on a shirt somewhere. Just what should I learn for this? I can just say that. Have you ever worked with customers on Dell Boomi? If so, what has been your experience? I haven't worked with it. I've seen it. Haven't had to work with it. All good about the repeat question. I hope it was answered. Okay, you kind of have the roadmap. I think we kind of referenced that. I started the Data Camp Data Engineer Career Track, and have completed 9 courses of 18. It seems very easy, but when I compare it with your path, seems hard. Thoughts? Yeah, I think the data camp, like, it's a great place to start if you want to like really get introed. It'll probably be the equivalent of like that first 10, 20 days of what I've got. But if you really want to like after that, right, you got to like really commit. You now have to like take it to that next level. So yeah, it is harder. That data camp is a great like intro. If it gets your foot in the door, great. But if you want to like actually start going to the next level, you're gonna have to spend some time. Whether it's with my stuff, whether it's the Zoom camp, whether it's what someone else's, like just something where you're really applying it and trying to do things yourselves. What do you think about the new AWS DE Associate exam? I took the beta, but don't know how much impact it would make on my resume. I haven't looked at the new one. Again, like there is a value for it after maybe you work for a company or after your company's a consulting company. Overall, it's only beneficial in a few cases. I would focus more on like building projects and things of that nature. Which cloud platform is better for DE? Obviously, there's a whole like all of these options are good. Like they all do the same thing. If you were talking about your career, I run across AWS most frequently. That is the most frequent solution I come across, whether it's a startup or a large company. So if you're going for purely market share, AWS is solid. Azure, I think, has a ton of work right now because of the fact that they're doing a ton of migrations. There's tons of work there. I've got at least one Azure migration currently that I'm doing, so that's also solid. I think the one that I usually kind of like leave out is GCP because the only thing I see people use GCP for is BigQuery, and other than that, I don't see people use it as much. So I think you're pretty safe picking either AWS or Azure, and you'll learn the others on the way. So I think that's kind of what I feel like there. Hold on while I just. I think this is asking is DSA, data structures and algorithms. Hold on, let me pull up the question. Is it necessary for an internship as a DE? Some companies, yeah, they will they'll expect you to actually yeah, to know DSNA. I think it's a little silly sometimes. I think you should just be able to do operational programming is what I often call it, which is like your standard, can you code? Can you work in a network? Can you write code in a network that writes a request, pulls data back, parses it out with JSON or something? But you will run into it, especially I think at I think Netflix might do some DSNA. Lyft, I think, does some DSNA. Stripe might do some DSNA. So especially those like high tech companies. But how much? I assume not as much as software engineers. So as long as you can do you should be able to breeze through an easy problem on LeetCode, and then Medium you should be able to do decently. So yeah, you can't do all of them, but you should be able to figure them out. How to go from data engineer to data architect? Generally a combination of experience. I'm not saying experience is the only thing, but experience on the right project. So are you working on data modeling projects? Are you working on data architecture projects? Whether that's just you helping the data architect, you've got to have some experience in that space. So that's really going to be the thing. There's going to be less about there's certain things you can read, certain books, sure, like designing data intensive applications to understand some of this stuff. But until you're actually having to apply it and solve these problems, it's going to be very different, in real life. It's going to be very hard. So I recommend trying to push yourself close into any projects that have data architecture. Top 5 companies to work for as a DE. I don't in terms of money, it's like Netflix, Facebook, Stripe's good. I think those are at least 3. There's probably more. I mean, any of the big tech companies, really. And again, that doesn't just mean Fangs or manga. That means anything that you probably assume is a big tech company is probably one. Uber. They all pay well, and you'll be dealing with interesting challenges, and you'll be given a little more autonomy, which is nice. So yeah, I don't know if there's a top 5, but anything like that. Also, it's hard not to see this and see Kind of smirk. Do you solve leak code even now, and how often? I haven't done it as much. I think because I've been busy trying to learn Mandarin. But every once in a while, I will open it up, especially at least like the SQL stuff. Not necessarily on leak code, but there's a few other sites that I'll just try to keep fresh on that. Especially if it's been a while since I've had to like code. I'll definitely try like opening it up and be like, I don't know. So less frequently than I did, but I was so frequent when I was younger that it was, it's usually fine. I'm also not interviewing as often, so I don't feel like it is as necessary. We're going to apply for internships for DE roles apart from LinkedIn. I mean, your standard places, Indeed, LinkedIn. I know you said not LinkedIn, but Indeed, LinkedIn. Those would probably be the main spots. If you know anyone in your area, maybe that could be a place. Also, again, don't look down on data analyst positions. They're great. They're a great place to start. They're also a great place to end. There's a lot you can learn from being a data analyst. So what's a good place to post your finished project and process and outcome? I plan to do some projects right now, so I have something to post on my LinkedIn. Yeah, I think LinkedIn, make a post about LinkedIn. Go on Medium. You can share it on Medium. You can make a little Git, obviously, make a little Git with make it nice and pretty. So yeah, you can probably do all three of those at the very least, and share about it, talk about it. Cool. I already answered is DSA needed? How to go from data analyst to data engineer from non-computer science perspective. Usually, the best way is to try to go laterally inside your company. I think I've said that a few times, but laterally from data analyst to data engineer. So try to get connected with a data engineering project or work under a data engineer. That will help you kind of get there. Lots of top 5 entry-level DE interview questions. Maybe I need to make a video on that. Can you suggest some projects, intermediate, advanced levels, which will be beneficial for landing the first job as a DE? Where should I showcase my projects? I mean, you can see some projects that definitely other people have done, but generally, the way I outline it is find some sources. If you want a more complex project, find a few sources that you think you can join together, because that's hard, right? Figuring out how to join 2 very disparate data sets is hard, and that's something you'd have to do likely at your company, and figure out a clever way to do that. So that's something that I think is worth doing. So find 2 data sets online, whether that's scraping things, whether that's they're open data sets that exist online, and then kind of try joining them. And then from there, you can use things like spin up your own Airflow instance on Docker, or let's see what else. You can spin up, things like DuckDB yourself. Like you can spin up a few things yourselves if you want to make it a little more challenging versus using out of the box solutions like Snowflake. Like try to figure out how to set up Spark yourself. And then from there, make sure you've got some decent questions to join that data, and then show it off with some sort of dashboard or report, or if you want to go like that extra level, an ML model. So, but the hardest part's going to be like that modeling and cleaning up the data and making sure you can join it. And then share it on LinkedIn, Medium. I think I said that already, but. How can one build a data engineering portfolio? I understand for software developers, they have a working website. What about data engineers? How do we show our work? Generally, this is why I say data engineers should learn a little bit about dashboarding and things like that, because dashboarding, you can build a site. Honestly, you could build a website about your data engineering work. Like I saw someone that scraped the transcripts from YouTube videos and then would summarize them, and then created a site that you could kind of go and get a summary of the videos, and then you'd actually see the image of the video, see a summary, see some highlights. And so that's to me some level of data engineering, right? Like you've scraped data from one place, you've kind of modeled it somewhere, and then you've shared it somewhere. So there are lots of ways you can share data. Whether it's a dashboard, it's building some sort of application. And so there are ways that I think you are still able to do that. Let's see. Someone asked, how much should I learn Apache Spark, Kafka, and Airflow for data engineering? I mean, it depends which phase you're at. If you're still learning the basics, focus on that. If you've got the basics down, you can pick up some Spark, but a lot of that's also slowly being abstracted away. And at the end of the day, it should be right. Like if anything is too complex, we should always try to make it as abstract as we can. Like again, there's always a point, and there's always a benefit to people who understand things at a lower level. We always need that too, where you kind of have this balance where it's like sometimes you need to fine tune things, and so you need to know how to code things and go down to a lower level. Sometimes you just need to get things done, and that's why we tend to abstract things away. So I mean, you can pick Spark, Kafka, Airflow. They're all good. They're all commonly used solutions. So you're not going to not find work if you learn them. But I wouldn't focus too heavily on those if you haven't learned the basics. So someone's asking, can a DE be a software engineer? In some cases, sure. There are plenty of DEs who are basically software engineers who just went into DE. But if you were more of like the SQL-based data engineer, it's going to be much harder, right? Like what you do is SQL and not a lot of coding, or if you just code scripting wise, it's going to be harder to make that switch for sure. Kind of the same answer as the first one, right? If you've been just scripting, it's going to be a little harder because you might not have all the better design patterns, better choices such as that. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel there. It's not a bad place, but like you're technical, but you don't necessarily have the same technical skills. And in that same way, software engineers have the same problem, where it's like sometimes they'll try to come into data engineering and they don't have, like, they're really good at thinking of like basically like individual transactions and how like millions of rows maybe come in or millions of transactions come in one at a time, but they're not necessarily as good at like thinking of like the bigger data, like how do I analyze big data sets kind of thing. Both of these problems can be solved, and you can learn both of these, but yeah. Cool. Well, we got a good amount of questions answered. Hopefully people, again, found this 100 days helpful. Tried to make some interesting problems here. Again, some of this stuff is more meant to just get you introduced to things. Like the whole days 51, where I need, I totally forgot I have this. I need to put this on my calendar. I will forget, tool intro. So what tools your data engineers know? That's nice. I'll do that soon. Cool. But after that, you kind of do an intro to a bunch of tools. People ask about PySpark, things like that. There's a full course to get you at least up to speed. I think the thing is with courses, you'll never end, I find in most courses, knowing how to, like, when you actually go into real life, it will never be the same, right? Like it's so hard unless people were allowed to show you their like daily lives to like really imitate how to do some of these things. So, yeah. What would be better, building a project with open source tools or using cloud to transfer from data science to data engineering? I think like if you, what is better? You're going to pick up a lot more skills trying to run things with open source tools, right? You're gonna have to likely pick up Docker and a few other things. And so I think that's arguably good. I would say, yeah, why not? And then people will probably likely understand that you can pick up the cloud part. If you can pick up how to spin up, some of these solutions like Airflow by yourself successfully, you can likely pick up how to do it in the cloud, because the cloud is like a few clicks and then you've got Airflow running. So I think that's worth it. Is there an advantage to doing both DE and Suite? I mean, sure, I guess if that's what you want. I say that because it's like, there's a lot of people that switch in between. I see a lot of people switch sometimes. Again, if they're very technical DE, they can switch. You should do what you like, right? Like if you like data engineering, you'll likely eventually make more money than if you, only kind of like Suite. So yeah, I mean, like it's good, but you got to figure out what you like. How's the future of data engineering roles? I mean, for the next while, at least, like I can never speak on beyond really even a few years, right? Like tech changes so fast. I imagine we'll have it for the next 5 at least. It probably will be the next 10, honestly. Like it's so hard to, like, unless something is really earth shattering, which it will probably impact more than just data engineering if this happens. Like you could try to pick another job and it will still impact it. Like, right, like people can be worried about ChatGPT, and it's like, it might be more than just data engineering that gets impacted by that. But for the next few years, we're likely on it, because at the very least, if you're at a large company, they have to migrate, which the cloud, which has been around since I think AWS's first stuff came out in like 2006, 2005. Someone can correct me, but somewhere in that area, really started getting started in like 2013, 2015 area. It's been a decade. There are still companies not migrated to the cloud. I have projects that I'm doing on-prem to cloud migration right now. It takes so long to go from new technology to migration, right? Like this is 10 years. They're not even started. It's going to be another 3 years till they're fully migrated. So the same thing can be said here with like anything, ChatGPT, AI, right? If ChatGPT started 2023, which is just starting, right? Like it's going to need another few years to get mature, or something similar. Like that's the thing. Like, whatever that technology is, it will take us another decade to migrate. So that's usually how I use it. Why does your voice sound like a robot? Maybe it's a little dry. Sorry. It's I'm in Denver, so my voice is possibly a little dry. I'm also a little congested. Every time I do a live, I swear, my nose decides to get congested. So sorry. That's why you keep seeing me like bent over, because I keep rubbing my nose. What do you think about the role of analytics engineer? I mean, I think it fills a need, right? Like, I don't think it's connected necessarily to like DBT, but I think it fills a need. Like I said this earlier, I always felt like data engineering had kind of two sides: the software side, the very technical side, and the more businessy side. Like there'd be little people on your team that's clearly the person that likes doing the business stuff. That's clearly the person that likes doing the technical stuff. And so I've always felt that that's existed. And so, they just gave it a name now. So that's why I feel about it. It exists. Let's see. What was this one? Did you answer the question about what a person should do if he is a failure? Is that a question? I didn't see that question. No. And has done nothing. I don't know. I haven't seen that. I don't know what question you're asking about. Seems like a little bit of a troll. My data engineer used DBT for ETL. He uses Data Coves as a platform for DBT. Can you suggest how I can learn DBT? Yeah, earlier we referenced, you can probably dig into Kahan's Data Solutions. It's a YouTube channel. Kahan, and then Data Solutions. You can look that up. He's got solid DBT playlists. I mean, I don't have a PySpark roadmap right now. I put in a video that's got like a 2-hour course video you can watch in this whole roadmap. I currently I'm not doing PySpark, since you asked that question twice. What are a few implementation tools or technologies of data engineering that are being implemented using the cloud? What are a few imp tools? Do you mean implementation tools? I don't know what imp tools are, actually. Do you mean like CI/CD? I don't know what you're asking there. Sorry, I just don't know what you're asking. I'm a SWE right now. I'm currently learning Python to pursue a career in data. I like solving problems. SWE has become boring to me just because at junior level in my company, I'm honestly solving small bugs maybe. Yeah, I mean, like data might be interesting. Data problems, there's going to be some similar stuff, right? Like there's always, in every role, there's some level of work that I find that's like monotonous, right? Like it's tedious. You got to learn to love the tedious stuff. So I don't know if that's what you mean by boring, because you're going to find that in data engineering too. Like there's some days where you're just migrating, SQL from Oracle to SQL Server. Well, these days from Databricks to Snowflake, or Snowflake to BigQuery, or whichever direction. And you have to make some changes, and it's going to feel kind of boring, but you got to learn to love some of these things. Should we consider SWE instead of DE if we don't really like migrations handling? I mean, you'll still do migrations as a SWE, right? Like the Pragmatic Engineer has a few good articles, I think, on migrations, where he like goes into like how like Lyft or Uber or something, or LinkedIn did some of their migrations. Like migrations are unavoidable in technology. You will likely be part of one. because someone somewhere is going to think it's a good idea, and it might be, and it might not be, but you're going to be part of one. What's the day-to-day life? Like what's the day-to-day of a data engineer? And I'm gonna probably end here in a few minutes, but companies like Airbnb and Facebook. I mean, besides, like, you can always put all the cliche stuff, like I wake up and go and get breakfast at the cafeteria, which was always fun. Like I do miss that a little bit, just because it was nice. It felt the options always felt fun when I worked at Facebook. Like going in and being like, what do I feel like for breakfast today? Actually, after the first 2 weeks, I realized I was eating like 3 times as much as I normally do because I had so many options and I had to like cut back. But after all of the fun stuff, I mean, it's your standard workday probably, right? You have meetings, you talk about projects that you might be on, you try to convince people that you're working on a good project, you try to get buy-in for a project, you write code, you write SQL, you write Python, you deliver those projects. Every 6 months you get concerned because you're having to do ratings and you're worried you're going to lose your job or like get rated poorly. So yeah, I mean, it's all kind of the same probably as most people from there, but yeah. Also, again, I'll probably call it off here in a minute, but let's just see what are some of the questions. Yeah, I'm going to do a whole video on this, actually, some AWS tools for data engineering. So I'm doing a whole kind of a mini series on this, but you can do things like, I mean, the easy ones are like Lambda, right? You're going to use Lambda. You're going to use Event Bridge, which will automate maybe your Lambda if you do some basic tasks for automation, or like you set up something to trigger off of an S3 bucket, which means you'll use an S3 bucket as well. Likely, you may or may not use RDS. You might just be pulling data from RDS. Like RDS is just their database system. So sorry if these are just abbreviations. You may or may not use MWAA, or basically Amazon's version of managed Airflow. You may or may not use something like an EC2 instance to spin up your own version of Airflow. I've seen people do that where they just spin up themselves in EC2. You'll likely have to, depending on if you're the only engineer or not, mess around with IAM. I've had to mess around with IAM way too much. You might have to set up VPCs. For example, I had to set up a VPC with a static IP address because we had to whitelist the Lambda, where the Lambda was coming from. So we had to like whitelist a VPC, which is a virtual private cloud, which is essentially just your own little network or IP address that you're setting up. That way, when the Lambda would make a call out, it would make a call out from a specific, essentially, IP address, and then it would be whitelisted. So there's a ton there. It's already 10 o'clock. I think I might have a meeting here, so I'm going to have to jump here. Hopefully, guys, this was helpful. This was a good little break in the 100 days. Give you guys a little breather. I clearly forgot I have to make a video at 51 days. I know I have a data governance video, but that's coming up soon. So I will make one on like tools for data engineers. And actually, maybe I'll make one for like some of the skills from AWS and tools from AWS. But hopefully this was helpful, guys. Hopefully I answered a ton of questions. And yeah, good luck on the next, whatever we have left. Is it like 60, 63, 64 days-ish or so? And wherever you end up, again, don't feel too rushed. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks all. Bye.